All right. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for taking your time to attend our Knowledge Series webinar organized by Genesis Ray. My name is Rahima, and I'm your host today. With me is also Jake Huang, who will be co hosting this webinar with me. And both of us are from the Singapore office. Jake, over to you.
Thank you, Rahima, and good afternoon to everyone. This is our first Knowledge Series webinar, and we are extremely grateful for the responses that we have received. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon. As a technology company that provides solutions to renewable and clean energy sector, we hope to embark this journey with you, not only to create great solutions that are needed by the industry, but also to share the knowledge of our expertise. We believe that sharing these knowledges will help the world solve its needs for a more sustainable form of clean energy. Together, let us create a better future for everyone in these exciting times. Now, please allow me to introduce our speaker and panelists. For our main speaker today, we have Dr. Anushika Bose, an expert in renewables and geospatial data, who is also our product innovation manager. Her past work includes her stint as an environmental scientist at the Helmholtz Environmental Research Center in Germany. Joining Dr. Anushika are three other panelists: Vishnu Krishnan, Dr. Pata Das, and Dr. Abhishek Mishra. Vishnu leads the product development team in Genesis Ray, leading the development of analytical products across the power and LNG sectors. He is instrumental to the development of our GIS-based infrastructure mapping and analytics tool called GenRay Explorer. Dr. Pata Das is an experienced energy and power system modeler. His expertise lies in the areas of mathematical optimization, data wrangling, visualization, and scenario analysis. At Genesis Ray, he is currently involved in building optimization models related to power system operation and planning. Dr. Abhishek Mishra is at present working as a senior analyst in our climate modeling team. His expertise lies in areas of climate modeling and handling large-scale data to help our GIS in accurate resource mapping. Rahima, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Jake. During the presentation, your microphone will be muted throughout. However, if you are able to post your questions in the Q&A box, one of our panelists is able to answer your questions either in private or we will take it towards the end of the webinar. I now hand over the session to Dr. Anushika to spend a good 25 minutes with you. Dr. Anushika?
Thanks, Rema. If you could allow me, I could just share my screen and we can get started. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Good afternoon, based on your current location and its respective time zone. Again, thanks, Rema, for the warm introduction. Thank you, Jake. So as my colleague mentioned, today I will be broadly discussing the use of geospatial technologies for advancing renewable energy harness by assessing the viability of sites prior to installations. So I'm hoping, apart from the introduction that was just given to you in two languages, most of you might have, found a minute or two to, look into our company's website to basically figure out the different verticals, the respective scopes of each of these verticals. But just in case you haven't, there's nothing to worry at all. I would kind of give a recap. So Genesis Ray Energy is a clean energy research and analytics firm. We are headquartered in Singapore, as my colleagues mentioned. Our primary focus is on renewables, LNG, and gas industries. The core objective being to minimize any risks and uncertainties which typically plague these industries and affect their overall bankability. Now, my team here at Genesis Ray specializes in renewable energy commercialization, development, and research by means of offering geospatial solutions. But before we move on to these geospatial offerings as such, just a basic. How extensively do you use geospatial, or let's say GIS, or satellite imageries, or even general maps as a part of your work, respective or irrespective of renewable energy? Completely. You have just 20 seconds. We would love to take a poll from all of you. Wow, like I imagined. I see many rare, never, and new kinds as well. So honestly, you guys have really nothing to worry. It's just a matter of time when you feel motivated enough, or in many cases, compelled enough to actually incorporate geospatial techniques to your usual work, like I did, like a decade back. And I started right here. So, this is where my journey in geospatial technology started, from the conservation interest of this majestic creature, the Indian tiger, especially when we were down to the iconic figure of 1,411 tigers across the country only. So, what we basically did was we employed geospatial solutions to radio collar this remaining lot of tigers, track their movement geospatially, assess their habitat site suitability, again, geospatially, transferring our visual interpretation of their preference on land to eventually address policy reforms that eventually address the conservation of their core natural habitats, ultimately supporting their continued survival till date. But coming back to the main topic, why is it important to assess site viability for renewable energy development in the first place? Now, of course, site viability analysis, as the name suggests, is the process of determining the fitness of a given tract of land for any definite purpose. In our case, this is for the sustainable and profitable renewable energy harness. Now, site viability majorly helps in anticipating any developmental conflicts quite early on in a project. It also helps in the effective selection of suitable equipment technologies with the same knowledge during the ongoing development of a project, assuring compliance of the equipment's durability and design with the prevailing environmental conditions at the given location. This eventually also becomes highly critical for both marketing and merchandising purposes of the project as well. Now, I'm sure you all might be already aware of this basic. But then again, you might be wondering, how is it actually beneficial to assess site viability using geospatial technologies? Now, I'm also sure that this question might be pretty straightforward to all the geospatial folks out there. But all of you non geospatial ones among us today, I would like to state that there are actually multiple benefits of assessing site viability using geospatial technologies. The first and foremost being they reduce time. The second being they reduce effort. And not to forget, they also substantially reduce costs. Then, of course, they also help in developing alternate scenarios using different combinations of criteria involved in any site assessment exercise in general. At times, even different thresholds of the same criteria, ultimately indexing the suitability of an entire region for the purposes of renewable energy harness. And that too entirely based upon a spatial decision support system. And of course, to top it all, the visualizations involved in our geospatial world makes comprehensions in general much, much easier. So with that today, what I would really want to talk to you about is how we at Genesis Energy are using specific types of geospatial analysis for the same very purpose. So let's say, talking about site viability assessment for renewable energy harness, of course, our first and foremost big focus should be on the detection and the analysis of the resource, the available, reliable, resilient, and affordable form of clean energy resource. And to get there, we have to think big. We have to think about the bigger picture, the vast geography, the multiple spatial and temporal scales within this geography, because only that is how can we tap the enormous reserves of renewable energy that actually exists in a given parameter space. So if you know what technologies might actually help us get there to this bigger picture, what helped us at Genesis Ray against the innumerable number of constraints and challenges that such a scope of work generally faces, just given the sheer amount of information we are talking about here. So obviously visualizations right here make it easier for us to comprehend such magnitude of information. Now towards your left, right here, it's really just putting the point across that, well, this is first of all round the clock resource availability information that we work on. In this case, it is the hourly wind speed and wind direction information over the subcontinent of India. And showing towards your right here is how these raw numbers are then cramped together to produce a single describing value of the entire resource available at the given location throughout the year. Now, this could be mean as displayed, or median, or any other percentile, let's say the 90th or the 75th percentile of the entire data set, meaning that this is the percentage of time the resource availability at the foresaid location exceeds the estimated cramped value that you see on the map. Now, this helps in the basic segregation of suitable locations across the entire space over time. Now, you can, of course, go ahead and make the decision on the site based on the availability of a resource. After all, that is what is ultimately required to produce energy that eventually meets the load as well. But is that enough for suitability assessment for renewable energy development? After all, you might agree with me that in this factor alone, there's already so much of data. It's already a very complex weather hindcast and forecast model at underplay here. And there's a lot going on within the model itself. That, of course, I will discuss a little. But all this just to give us the basic hourly weather information. So I would ask you again, is that enough for suitability assessments? Of course not. In addition to this, there's a lot that we still need to think about. There's a lot that still needs to be considered apart from the resource, because there are these other parameters as well that govern site viability, and each of them are equally complex in space and time. Now, like I've already mentioned, visualizations in general make it easier for us to comprehend such huge magnitude of information. As a result, we all geospatial folks, we have really had to develop, or I must say, at times we've been forced to develop what we also call as the state-of-art visualization tools. Now you might be wondering, what is that exactly? So state-of-art data, the big data, the fancy word these days, along with visualizations, we are developed visualization tools together jointly help us in kind of diving into the complexities of the challenges associated with the assessment of project site viability. Right from the assessment of the resource to the spatial planning of the infrastructure, up until the actual final energy harness, all can be better understood and manipulated by means of such visualization tools. Now, I've already given you a glimpse of the complexities associated with the resource parameter in my previous slide. But like I mentioned, we have many more such parameters to be considered, some at the economical level, some at the technical level, some at the socio-political level, etc. To actually get to a viable project site by all means. At Genesis Ray, what drives our assessments is our understanding of all these parameters in the visualization environment of geospatial technologies. You can just see here on the slide, they're just some examples. We at Genesis Ray particularly invest in such immersive environments that allow us to get past the raw numbers and start getting into the compact, dimensional, cataloged information, which eases our and our clients' ability to comprehend such huge volume of data all at once. Let's say, in case of resource here, like you can see, where we are really exploring the wide resource parameter space across months, through seasons, over the years, and that also on an hourly basis. Such tools allow us to compact that entire information into different percentiles of availability. And this cataloged information is then easier to use for further assessments. Now, before I move on to other parameters, let's talk a little bit more about the resource parameter criteria, which obviously, as we all know, is the most essential aspect of renewable energy development projects. So there's this fundamental problem with renewable energy. Actually, I would rephrase it. It's a fundamental challenge, not a problem. And that is, it's highly variable and continuous in both space and time. And really, this poses a lot of challenge to our traditional models because it comes down to how you can take something like a phenomena of weather that is inherently continuous and variable with already too much of information crammed into a discrete model space, and to add to it the volume of such information coming from, let's say, a district level or a regional level or a continent level, which also matters, especially at a sharp resolution of 1 kilometer or 5 kilometer, given our agenda of renewable energy harness. This just keeps adding to the challenge because the bigger the region, the greater the volume of data it generates. Now, this is probably one of the most impactful pieces also of what we contribute to at Genesis Ray, the very resource analysis. So let's say when I say resource, in layman terms, it's how much does the wind blow or how much does the sun shine. And although I say it like that, but it's actually really, really hard to comprehend. Therefore, we employ many different weather research forecast models to actually predict these weather parameters. There are the numerical weather prediction models, then there are the semi-empirical models, and then there are also the geophysical based models, all having their kinds of differences, their kind of accuracies, of course, their respective deficiencies as well. Now, all these are nothing but ways to ascertain how well the model predicts reality. They have different accuracies when we compare their output to the ground measured weather data. They have different uncertainties, and they also have their own respective prediction of the resource variability. Now, again, variability within, let's say, a wind resource or a solar resource, again, in layman terms, is that the sun doesn't always shine the same, the wind doesn't always blow the same throughout any given year in any given region. Year in and year out, you have extreme weather phenomena like cyclones, which directly affect the wind resource. You have volcanoes that appreciably reduce the sun hours for weeks together, making solar irradiance in such regions absolutely ineffective for harness. So basically, these models can directly predict, influence, and even impact our ability to generate energy, as we depend on them thoroughly, again, to predict the weather phenomena as our natural source of energy. So, really, the biggest question is still how can we ensure that we are preserving and properly characterizing the resource at every given location through time? And that's not just exclusive to wind speed or solar radiance as the weather parameter that needs to be used for renewable energy development. Or this is not just exclusive to the rather diverse subcontinent of India that faces the challenge of abundant geographical variability, which in turn directly influences the weather as well. It's actually the same with almost any of our renewable energy options across any given region, if you please. So let's take another case of the Federal Republic of Germany. Here you can see again, in the given example, solar irradiance as the renewable source of energy versus the installations designated for its harness across the entire geographical space of the country. Now you can see how the installations perfectly follow the geographic diversity of the resource. The north clearly has lesser installations than the south, ultimately also cross-checking the viable location assessment done by researchers like us to be able to accurately represent this rather variable and continuous resource across time with exact precision. Now, this diversity is applicable to each and every energy resource option, not just renewables specifically, but also to the non-renewables. Ultimately, following the resource availability, this diverse spread of installations are also good for the sake of grid stability in our world of renewables. It is for sure provides additional reliability just in case one of our predictions goes amiss. Now that I have kind of laid out the major problem or the challenge, like I said, sorry. Similar and complementary issues also exist for the other set of influencing parameters that I will be discussing shortly with examples. But before we get there, you might be wondering what could be a generic solution to each of them. What can we apply as a solution to each of their challenge, mostly stemming from the humongous amount of information they bring to the front? Well, of course, the simple answer is geospatial analysis, right? That's why we are all here. So, to all the geospatial people out there, when I say spatial or geospatial analysis, I'm not really referring to the old traditional GIS. Of course, those who don't belong to the field might think I am, but at Genesis Ray, we are really moving beyond GIS and embracing what we call as geospatial data science. So what exactly is geospatial data science. It is nothing but a kind of combination of traditional GIS, its resulting geospatial big data, spatial statistical operations on this big data, and ultimately some spatial, some temporal, some multivariate modeling techniques together, followed up with their subsequent analysis. These analyses are in turn represented in the form of visualizations. So, geospatial data sciences, when we encompass all of them together, at Genesis Ray, our eminent geospatial team broadly focuses on mostly creating this humongous amount of geospatial data at times from scratch and then running different spatial operations over the same data. Now, for the given purpose of renewable energy site viability analysis, such geospatial data is to be created and processed for all the influencing parameters in question, not only the resource. This can be represented in the form of a pyramid. This pyramid represents the levels of respective potentials of the influencing parameters, where as and as you move up the level of the pyramid, you are applying, let's say, technological constraints at one level, economical constraints at another level, to kind of whittle down the resource potential until you ultimately obtain only what the developable renewable energy potential exists right here at the tip in any given location. Within each of these levels, you have respective research domains, each being assessed from a geographical perspective. For example, we are trying to look at population dynamics in some, or the cost of wildlife issues, or any natural barrier in some. Everything versus the actual available energy resource in the region. And this is just a kind of a sample of what we are looking into. But to give you more specifics, I would straight jump into an example. But before that, we would like you to take another quick poll. So, do you think at this point in the presentation that spatial data science can actually reduce these typical impacts of challenges normally related to site viability assessment projects? Again, you got only 20 seconds, so think and answer quick. Wow, many of you actually think it's worth the time and effort. But yes, of course, it can be challenging to some. Then I guess many of you would actually, find the following case study that I'm about to present quite informative. So, talking about spatial temporal modeling based research, particularly for renewable energy harness here, you can find a lot of research literature out there, several use cases, checking the transferability of such a model to reality. One such classic work has been done by one of my colleagues from the University of Tsukuba in Japan, and I was fortunate enough to contribute to this effort as well. So basically, we worked in the region of Fukushima. It's in Japan, as you all know. Now, Fukushima is located on Japan's eastern Pacific coast and divided by mountains across its geography. All in all, its geographic placement itself makes it naturally gifted with enormous amounts of wind energy potential, as in the mere basis of the resource availability. So, next, while assessing site viability in the region of Fukushima for wind energy harness, apart from the available wind energy resource in the region, the other big research focus areas that would also influence the advancing of renewables would be trying to understand the other key criteria and constraints at underplay here. Let's say, for example, the ridges along the mountain ranges in the region. Very simply put, it's obvious that we cannot develop every windswept ridge in the region. And of course, we might not even want to. It could be a kind of a specialized natural environment. There could be critical wildlife interactions that we might want to preserve. We might want to prevent any threat to any resident or any migratory endangered species or to any historical conservation interest in the site. We might want to keep these parameters in mind and highlight or specially exclude them from our spatial analysis. Another way we can use spatial analysis for such procedure is through, let's say, transmission networking. So basically, a lot of renewables are site dependent. We have already established that fact. So if you want to build on a resourceful site, given that the site also needs a dependency of transmission networking, which of course is needed to evacuate the energy harnessed, avoiding transmission losses. Now, in reality, you can of course do this by developing spur lines. But what we are trying to do with spatial analysis is that we're trying to understand the relationship between the quantity and the quality of the available renewable energy resource versus its proximity to the existing grid infrastructure connectivity. And just in case existing grids aren't available anywhere in the close proximity, how far do we have to go in that case? And what would that added cost of this distance that needs to be covered, that needs to be developed with spur lines, how would that cost look like to our project's finance? Then again, could you actually do any of these activities I'm suggesting, given if already a land development restriction prevails on the site? No, you cannot. Therefore, basically the key here is that all these criteria are put together and they fundamentally change the available supply of renewable energy in the given region. And that's how we grade it in terms of suitability for harness. And as you can imagine, if you further add a list of constraints to the pre-existing list of criteria that I've considered, that's going to be pretty impactful and would further reduce the available rather enormous reserve of the resource in this given region and ultimately bring it down to only a few handful of developable sites that can actually be tapped for energy harness. Another way to get to the same assessment is through the characterization of the existing locations already being harnessed in a machine learning based classification model. This is an archetype form of classification basically, where the existing wind turbine database throughout the entire region, let's say in case of Fukushima, in case of this ABC location, this will be applied with some sort of characterizations, like what is their distances to the nearest substation, what is their distances to the nearest road network, their respective land pricing information, etc. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to better understand the existing developmental patterns, the criteria combinations, so that we can project similar developmental patterns out into the future. Wherever similar combination of such criteria occurs in the region of Fukushima, let's say, it can be automatically designated as a potential site. Now, this method, although seems logical enough, is also tricky given the continuously changing land use policies around renewable energy harness, given the continuously evolving equipment technologies making harness easier in difficult terrains as well. What could not be considered earlier, or the continuously evolving equipment technologies achieving a greater harness per square kilometer of area than their predecessors ever could. So, all in all, these are kinds of disparate pieces of spatial analysis and research, more like an ecosystem of framework of analysis, with all of them kind of feeding into one another, and by means of which we are actually able to perform a successful renewable energy potential modeling exercise that really combines together all of what I have been discussing about in a geospatial environment. Here, as you can see, I have mentioned, we have our resource information, we have our socio-political obligations, along with our spatial limits and constraints. We are feeding all this together in one ecosystem to come up with the ultimate geospatial supply curves of not just the renewable energy potential, but actually the harnessable renewable energy potential, illuminating the results of project site viability across the given region. Now, personally, what's really fascinating to me here and what I really get a little excited about is that it doesn't end here. It doesn't end here at project site viability analysis. The corresponding spatial analysis and research further feeds into so much more. The results of this project site viability analysis forms the basic foundation for so many other downstream projects. Like you can see here on the slide as well, the technology performance of two different types of wind turbine models shortlisted for the harness in the assessed region. How does each of these technology perform on the given resource number that we simulated on the hourly basis? What are the relative economics involved with each of these options here? All in all, what this allows us to do is it allows us to further evaluate, research, and develop pathways that depend on the crucial foundation of the assessed site viability via spatial analysis. Lastly, while projecting the growth of renewable energy out into the future using the power of geospatial technologies, our proposed sites for future deployment can always be overlaid with the existing installed location. This not only cross checks our spatial analysis with respect to the criteria and constraints that we have considered for the exercise. This, of course, proves that we are doing a really good job at modeling the harnessable renewable energy, but also it proves that our industry targets mostly cost optimal locations for the harness of renewable energy. Therefore, summarizing, this entire exercise of geospatial assessment for project site viability merely aimed at reducing technological or economical barriers to renewable energy advancements by reducing time, effort, cost, along with, of course, minimizing any drastic kind of changes to our built in environment. But in turn, this very exercise also helps us envision every facet of detail for a project before its commencement with a geospatial eye, anticipating all the challenges involved early on, helping us come up with different solutions for identifying only and only the bankable solutions for the harness of renewable energy. And quite frankly, like I said, it doesn't end here, and there is so much more. Which brings me to the end of my talk. And in case I have ended early, I would like you to take another quick poll and let us know if you would be using geospatial technologies at all for your next site assessment. And with that, I would also like to thank all of you for devoting your precious time to our webinar. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from the very first of our knowledge series. And we hope to have you back on board for our future events. Lastly, I would also like to appreciate our business development team at Genesis Ray for doing a rather fantastic job of helping us kind of spreading the word and getting our research and practices out there to a broader community. So I look forward to all your questions in our Q&A session. And now to your poll. Once again, thank you very much, all of you. Yeah, I guess 75% people are ready to.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Anushika, for the very insightful take on the geospatial application to assess project site viability. I hope our audience have learned a thing or two about this subject and would be able to take their knowledge back to their organizations or their school. I would like now to take a look at some of the questions that have come in from the audience. We hope to spend the next 10 minutes to answer all your questions. If we cannot answer them all today, then we will answer them and email the answers to you. So it's good to put your email in the Q&A as well. So let's take a look at some of the questions that has come in. I think we do not. Are there any questions that's coming in? Okay, I think there is a question here that has come privately. Okay, let me just read it to you. I think this is the question. How can better understanding of the current infrastructure using GIS, how can that help in making better site selection process in the future? So I think, Vishnu, would you like to answer this question?
Sure, Rima. I think I'm audible, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, right. So I think we are always a step ahead if we can actually visualize, let's say, all the energy assets in a particular area using a GIS platform, I would say. Let me just give an example. Let's imagine, let's say, a process where you are in a situation that you are in a process to find a suitable site for your renewable project. That can be solar or maybe wind. And of course, you'll be considering those factors that Anushika was mentioning, like resource profiles, hazard zones, nearest grid connectivity, etc. And finally, you might, you made your decision and you end up finding a particular location which can be actually suitable for all the factors that you might have considered. But just think about a case where there is already an existing infrastructure in that particular area that you have selected based on this exercise, maybe an operational project, or maybe there's an under construction project happening in that same area. Then what happens is the entire analysis that you have done based on these exercises, it's a lengthier process, right? The entire site selection process. So if after you do all these, difficult steps, and finally you're ending up with with an area where there is an existing project, that makes the entire analysis go wrong. So you might need to redo the same analysis. So I believe, yes, it's very important to understand the current infrastructure using GIS, but for better site, let's say, selection process. Being said that, let's say a Gender Explorer platform that we have developed, in which we can actually visualize each and every operational assets out there. And not only that, you can actually get to know the major market players in that region, technological selections, proven technologies in that region, so that these things can augment the entire decision-making process for this optimal site selection. Hope that answers the question.
I hope so. Very interesting. So there are questions coming in already. Okay, there's one from Anshuman Chowdhury. How do you check the accuracy of various suitability models, and like which model to use for which area, like on continental level or on state or district level? Is there anyone from the panelists who would like to take this question?
Yeah, Prime, I'm audible. There's Abhishek. I'd like to take the answer to
Okay,
this question. Yep.
thank you, Abhishek.
So, yep, it's a nice question. So, fundamentally, just to estimate the resource numbers, if, for example, if you talk about, if I have to check the accuracy, now one of the biggest challenges is in assessment of that accuracy is, as you talked about, at a continent level, a state level, or a district level, there will be different processes which might be affecting your resource. For example, in case of solar, just to take an example, this period which we are witnessing over North India, for example, it's an extreme pollution period where we have a lot of aerosol loading. So similarly, you have to evaluate or validate your model, which will be able to accurately estimate the impact of those aerosol numbers on your resource potential. Okay, so that's how you go about doing it. I mean, evaluating your model over different regions, and it could be one model is suitable for one particular location at a particular configuration, and it won't be suitable in a different place. So in that case, you need to come up with uh, other, I mean, identifying those missing processes, and then try to train your data to account for that variability in the process by identifying what could be the missing process. So that's how you go about checking, I mean, from the resource point of view. In suitability, site suitability, maybe someone else can comment a bit more on that. I was just talking about the fundamental resource number.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Abhishek. We have a question from, I will just skip Yasir's question. I'll get back to Yasir, but there's a question from Bose Sumatra. Hey, very interesting PowerPoint, Anushika Bose. Could this be a friend of yours? Could you comment on how your models are different from Global Wind Atlas, developed by DTU World Bank for wind resource assessment? Do these models also account for varying turbulence intensities at sites?
So yeah, I think I'll jointly answer this question with Abhishek. So I can just answer what is the basic difference between the weather models that we select and the ones that are provided by DTU or the World Bank. Mostly they give you just one describing number, which is the mean. And mean is actually an it's just a kind of it's just overvalued, because mean kind of pushes away the actual information. Mean can disturb the actual fact as well. For example, in Kerala, there was such a flood event. Normally, Kerala doesn't have wind energy potential to harness. But if you select a mean, the mean will be a wrong describing value, because it will also take in the abnormal natural weather condition that it occurred, out of the blue. So what we do is we try to give you the same information in percentiles. What is the percentile of time you will get this amount of resource? That is a better way to assess how the resource can be available at that given location for a greater amount of time. A mean can be misleading. So yeah, that is one thing from our side. But yes, Abhishek, if you would like to add any other based
Yeah,
on
I
the
mean,
analyzed data set, how are
yeah,
they
absolutely.
different?
Yep. So on your second point, which you talk about, that do these models also account for varying turbulence intensities at the site? So the answer is yes. So how do we go about doing that? The weather forecasting model, which we use at the climate modeling group at Genesis Ray, we account for different processes through different modules. In the, I mean, that's the weather forecasting model. It's widely used, and in that there is a module called as Planet, which basically computes the processes inside the planetary boundary layer. That is the, I mean, typical distance from surface to approximately 2 kilometers. And yes, we do take into account. And again, as I talked about, the proxy for us is, I mean, if you run any weather forecasting model, at the end you will get numbers, right? Our objective is we make those numbers meaningful. And for that, we do all kinds of stuff, right? From, as explained by Anushika, I mean, the ML models and other stuff. But uh, ultimately, our end goal is to represent those different processes to give you an accurate number. I mean, for the wind estimate at any site. I hope that answers your question.
And one more thing, one last thing I would like to add to this. Because our information is available at an hourly basis, it actually can be put into a electricity generation forecast model, because those require your actual hourly weather information to give you an actual estimate of the kind of power you can expect from, this particular tract of land. So if you put in a mean number across throughout every hour of every day, it doesn't make really sense, especially if it's in case of a solar thing. If in case it's in case of a wind thing also, you need the wind speed at 6 o'clock, at 12 o'clock, at 6 o'clock again. You can't put that same mean thing. So yes, it requires, uh, for us going from scratch to end to completely get to you the numbers of generation that you can expect from a site.
Okay. Thank you so much, both. Right. We have we have such a short time now. We have passed the 45 minutes for webinar. So I would like to ask your permission to just extend to another 5 more minutes for us to just answer a few questions here. So we have from Yasir two questions. Is it possible to do the repowering projects or new solar wind hybrid projects? And the second
Absolutely.
question, I don't know whether the two questions are related. So, is the geospatial studies done by Genesis accepted by the bankers for funding the projects? So, there's two questions here.
Okay, so thank you for the questions, Yasir. So first of all, answering the question of your repowering, of course, the turbines that are standing right now in most of the Indian subcontinent, at least, let's take an example. They're outdated. They really need to change. And of course, now that I've already said that the equipment technologies are advancing at a unprecedented rate, the amount of energy we could harness per square kilometers is can be vast more if you invest in better technologies. So of course, that is one thing. Repowering is absolutely a needed essential. There's no two ways about it. But as far as talking about the solar and wind hybrid thing goes, it's actually a good concept and it actually should be favored. Why? Because solar and wind kind of complement each other, given the kind of solar is only available in the day. Wind can still complement it in the night, and it will be the same grid. You don't have to put additional cost for the grids or anything. So basically, the complementing nature of the two resources itself actually are in favor that solar and wind hybrid projects jointly have a bigger success if given a chance. Of course, the investment in wind energy is actually very high than the investment that is required in solar energy. So yes, it's a difficult call with respect to finance, but jointly with respect to a technical background, with respect to the logic we put it energy harness and transmission, I think hybrids have a great future. And to answer your second question, how geospatial studies is accepted by bankers, I think it's actually an interesting concept, and that could actually go far enough, because when you provide the bankers with exact numbers, they already know that they're not putting their money in the wrong place. They already have proof for that. So of course, our clients can go ahead and use the same information, like I said, not quite early on, before even they start to invest anything. It's just that you understood which site will bring you more profit, will bring you more insurance, which will have, in case of, you opt for an insurance policy for the project, you'll actually have a very low kind of maintenance cost, because you already know that the success of the given assessed site is way higher,
Okay.
and you have proof.
Mm.
So yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Anushika. I think we can just take one last question. And I've not heard from Dr. Parta. I'm not too sure whether you would like to answer the follow-up question from Mr. Ashuman Chowdhury. Here he says, let's just say I'm a client interested in setting up a solar plant, and I would like a floating solar plant over some reservoir of freshwater lake or hydropower reservoir. So how would the analysis team take this idea? Would you go ahead, or it will be nullified?
Partha, you may please unmute your mic.
Sorry. So I think floating power plant concept for photovoltaics are gaining popularity, not only in reservoirs and also I think in the lakes and also oceans. So, but I think current geospatial models tend to overlook those aspects to calculate the realistic potential of it, considering the maybe the nature of the waves and various parameters of the oceanographic parameters. So I think those elements are needed to be considered in future GIS-based tools and models. I think Anushika can add more on this.
Yeah, so basically, it's always the kind of resource option you want to tap. The factors change accordingly. The factors, you cannot put the same photovoltaic options on a floating solar panel. You have to make those changes. Like in case of a land-based photovoltaic panel kind of a set, we actually regard lakes and all as a danger hazard condition. It's in the floodplain zone. It can flood. It can destroy the entire effort and finance you put. But again, if you say it's a floating thing, my factors change. That straight away goes from actually a hazard zoning exclusion criteria to straight away a criteria where, okay, the lake, the depth of the lake, how much buoyancy it requires, how much the buoyancy of the floating panels it should have. The factors automatically change. So the question directly influences the factors that you need to further assess for a successful site suitability experiment. So of course, at Genesis Ray, we are still not, really into floating kind of panels, because floating panels also require a lot of high maintenance. The solar panels, especially on land, require just the cleaning effort is so high. But in case of floating, it's actually a a science that is still being researched and developed. So yeah, I think India should take it slow, learn from the predecessors, and try to focus and get where they have. And then of course, once you're there, once you have a strong foothold in the renewable energy industry, of course India is fifth already, so we're already somewhere there. So I think it's just about time, where floating solar is also a great option to actually look into.
Okay, I think we're coming to the end of it. We can just take one more question. Yeah, to Yasir, yes, we have a recording of this webinar. We will be sending it out to you. And the last question from Sudindra K. Anushka, can you talk about challenges of management of reactive power in the grid in view of challenges of penetration of renewable power? Is this question relevant or misplaced?
I think one of my colleagues is better placed to answer this question. Partha, would you like to?
Yeah, so we all know that integrating large scale of renewables comes with additional challenges and need of reactive powers and additional flexibility, balancing resources, etc. are the additional challenges that we have to ensure to successfully integrate the large RE capacity into the grid. So, but in relation to the GIS based site resource suitability calculation, what I can say that GIS can act as a primary kind of a filter, which can be a kind of an input to the power sector specific models that can actually calculate those additional reactive power or flexibility need. So based on input analysis, site selection matrix, we can build a hierarchy of the potential locations based on the profitability of a project, need of additional investment into those balancing options like that, and then you can take a informed decision. So yeah,
Yeah, just to
I have
add on
answered
to
partially.
what part, just to add on to what Partha was saying, yes, this is actually not completely, I would say, a GIS kind of a thing. But of course, GIS plays a vital part, as you have already mentioned, the initial set of identifying, let's say, RE-rich areas and all, and getting the generation numbers, and also that you can actually understand like, how much capacity is there, at the same time, how much reactive power will be generated by these, let's say, wind turbines and stuff like that. So combined with, let's say, power models and all, we can actually kind of troubleshoot this kind of a challenge which is faced in the power industry. Yeah.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of this session, and I hope we have answered all the questions that you have asked. The recording will be available. Jake, can you do the closing?
Okay, all right. I believe that we have come to the end of our webinar, and we are truly humbled by your presence. Please drop us an email at contactus@genesisray.com to request for the recording of this session or an e-certificate for the time that you have spent with us. If you are interested to know about more of the kind of the work that we do or the GIS map that we have developed, please feel free to contact us and we will be more than happy to oblige. You can also go to our website to request for a demo or a trial of the GIS mapping tool for your organization or school. Please also indicate your interest to join our next Knowledge Series webinar. Have a good week ahead, and thank you all till we meet again. Goodbye.